So if you're like me, and when you're at the fabric store, you can't resist all of these beautiful pre-cut strips and pre-cut fabrics and jelly rolls, and you just have to take them home. And then when you get home, you don't know what to do with them. Well, I've got the perfect, most easiest, beginner-friendly Quilt As You Go quilt for you, and I'm going to show you how in this video. Hi, Monica here. Welcome to my channel, Poole TV. If you're new here, think of me as your virtual Quilt As You Go sewing tutor person. Welcome to Quilt As You Go with strips part 2. In part 1, I showed you how to make this, stitching and flipping strips in long panels. I showed you how to get them nice and straight, and then also how to add a row of personalized applique, how to join them together with my easy cover strip method. And once you know how to make this, you'll then be able to make quilts like this. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make big, strippy Quilt As You Go blocks like this. And if you're feeling adventurous, how you can join the blocks on point like I've done with my fruit salad quilt. To make one block, you'll need an 18-inch backing square, and then you'll need a 17-inch square of batting, and you're going to center that so that you'll have a 1/2-inch gap going all the way around the edge, and you can hold that in place with quilt basting spray. You're then going to need 6 2.5-inch wide strips, and they're going to be just a little bit longer than the block, and you'll be able to get 2 strips out of one long jelly roll strip. Make the colors interesting by alternating them between lights and darks, or just so that they're going to stand out. And on the edge, you're going to need a 3 1/4-inch wide strip on one side and a 3 1/4-inch wide strip on the other side. This is because we're going to join our blocks together using my easy cover strip method, which is quick, easy, fully machine sewn, but it does take a little bit extra off the edge of your block. So this is going to make sure that our strips end up all being the same size. You may be wondering why I use the easy cover strip method a lot, and that's because it's great for beginners, it's quick, it's easy. If you're an advanced quilter and you like to make charity quilts, it just really speeds up the process, and it's very forgiving, and you pretty much can't go wrong with it. So for the 6 strips, you can use pre-cut 2.5-inch wide strips, and if you're like me, you've probably got a lot of extra fabric in your stash that you can easily cut the extra 3 1/4-inch wide strips for the outer edge. Now we want the strips and the backing fabric to be sewn with the grain line in the same direction. So position the straight grain of the fabric, that's where the selvage was cut off, that's our solid edge, position that in the crossways direction. Then going down, you'll see that's our crossways grain, which has a little bit of stretch in it, because your jelly roll strips also have a little bit of stretch in it. So when you have your grain lines positioned in the same direction, your fabric is going to react in the same way when you sew it, and you'll have less problems. So thread up your sewing machine with a thread that's going to match your fabrics on the top and also your backing fabric, a size 80 quilting needle, and a stitch length of 3. Now you will need a 1/4-inch seam allowance for this project, even that scant 1/4-inch seam allowance like I've spoken about before in the videos. So you can use your walking foot if you like, and just trying to judge that 1/4-inch seam. You can use your standard foot. I'm going to use my standard foot today, and I've just moved my needle position over. If you have a 1/4-inch foot that doesn't have a guide on it, you can use that. But sometimes I find that the guide tends to get caught in the batting, so that's why I'm not using that foot. I'm just using my standard foot, and I've measured from the edge of my foot to the needle, and I'm making sure that that's giving me just that 1/4 inch, but that tiny bit less than 1/4 inch. Start sewing level with the top edge of your fabric. Fold the edge of the block in so that it slides easily through your machine, and away we go. And stop sewing level with the edge of the backing fabric. Flip the top strip over and make sure that it lines up with our marked line. Press. I think it's a good idea to press after each strip to make sure that's going to be nice and accurate. And if your strip doesn't meet that marked line, that means that your seam allowance is either too big or too small, and you'll need to adjust that. Sew your next strip on in the same way. If you just discovered this channel, I'm Monica. I'm a designer and sewing tutor from Australia. I post a video every week showing you how to make your quilts quilt as you go. If you'd like to learn with me, subscribe to Poole TV and click the notification button so that you don't miss a video. You're also welcome to join our private Facebook page, Poole Sewing, where you can ask questions in a safe space. And if you get a chance, head to our website to sign up for our weekly newsletter. And here's our finished block. So by marking your lines and taking the correct seam allowance, by the time you fold that last strip over, it's going to meet the other side edge of the block perfectly. And another tip is that if you find if your top strip is stretching while you are sewing, you may need to loosen off your foot pressure. Now that your block is complete, you can flip it over and trim away the excess level with your backing square. Double check that all your blocks are the same size and you can trim them slightly if necessary. You can make as many blocks as you like depending on the size of quilt that you want to make. Now let's join the blocks together. Lay your blocks out with the strips alternating between strips running down and strips running across. I'm going to join 3 blocks together in this video. Sew your blocks together back to back like this, pin them together, and then we're going to head to the machine and sew with a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre seam allowance. Now when you sew the seam, you won't actually be sewing through the batting, but if you do sew through it, that's okay. That's why I always say use a nice flat low loft batting. And not having batting in the seam means that we're going to have a nice flat seam that we'll be able to press on the top of our work. You'll see that your quilt is nice and neat on the back. And on the front, we have the raw seam that we're going to press open and cover with our cover strip. That slightly bigger seam allowance helps the seam to sit nice and flat on the top of your work. The cover strip is a 2-inch strip made up with a 1-inch bias tape maker. Next step is to cut 3/4 inch wide strips of fusible web. Iron the fusible web strips with the rough side facing down onto the wrong side of your cover strip. To make sure that your cover strip is going to be perfectly straight and centered, mark a line that's 1/2 inch away from the center of the seam, just down one side of the seam. Peel away the paper backing from your cover strip and position the cover strip level with the marked line, spacing it 1/2 inch from the beginning and 1/2 inch from the end, and that's going to reduce the bulk in our adjoining seams, and that will get covered by your strip that runs across in the other direction. Iron in place and head to the sewing machine and sew down either side of your cover strip, sewing nice and close to the edge. So here are 3 blocks joined together with the easy cover strip method. You can make as many blocks as you like and make any size quilt you like. Now I'm going to show you how to sew these blocks on point. To sew these blocks on point, you're going to need some corner triangles and some side triangles. For the corner triangles, you'll need a 15.5 inch square that we are going to cut once on the diagonal. For the batting, you'll need a 14.5 inch square, cut once on the diagonal also. The side triangles are cut from a 20-inch square, cut once on the diagonal. Now because my ruler is not long enough to go from corner to corner, I'm going to fold my triangle in half like this. And then I'm going to very carefully cut on that folded edge. There's 2 triangles there. And the batting for this is cut from an 18.5-inch square, and I want to cut this once on the diagonal also. Take a backing triangle and place that on your table with the wrong side facing up. Take a batting triangle and center it so that you've got that 1/2-inch gap all the way around the edge. And then place your top triangle on top. As I mentioned before, I'm making my backing and my top triangle in the same fabric. You can hold those layers together with basting spray or safety pins. I'm actually using fusible batting for this project. It's the Hobbs double-sided fusible cotton batting. You can quilt your triangles any way that you like. I'm just going to mark straight lines that are 2 inches apart. To do this, I've just centered my triangle onto my cutting mat. I've lined it up with a line at the top and it's nice and straight at the bottom. And then I'm just going to use the markings on my mat to mark those spaces that are 2 inches apart. Quilt on the marked lines. To sew a corner triangle on, center it with your block and pin it back to back and sew with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Press the seam open and trim away the excess of the triangles as they were a little bit big to begin with. Iron a cover strip over the seam and stitch in place. And now pin and sew on a side triangle. You can see the quilt starting to take shape now. And another tip is when you are sewing them together, make sure that you sew with the blocks on top. This will hold the triangles nice and stable. Once again, press the seams open. Mark the line that's 1/2 inch away from the seam. Peel away the paper backing and iron on the trams. Making sure that you always start that 1/2 inch away from the end. Even though the cover strip finished 1/2 inch away from the edge, by the time I sew the seam, press it open and apply my next cover strip, the raw end is always covered. So here's a corner of my quilt. This is what it looks like from the front. And this is what it looks like from the back. To finish making a quilt on point like this, you would join your rows together, so on the diagonal. So you can see I've got 3 blocks together and then I sewed on the side triangles. Then you would sew 5 blocks together and sew on the corner triangles. Then you would do the same thing down this side here, and then you're just joining the long rows together on the diagonal. You can make your quilt with different squares on the back. The way I made this quilt and the quilt behind me, I actually used 50 centimeters or 20-inch pieces off the bolt. From that piece, I was able to get an 18-inch square, 6 2.5-inch strips, and 2 3.25-inch strips. And those strips were cut down the fabric in the same direction as the selvage, which is totally fine to do. Or you can make an absolute scrap quilt where every backing square is different and you use up lots of different strips from your stash. And if you want all of the detailed instructions, the Fruit Salad quilt is available as a PDF purchase from our website. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you next week with another Quilt As You Go video. Have a great week, everyone. Bye.